Hey there, tired listener. Today we're taking a brief trip to history's coldest seat of power, the early Middle Ages, a time when authority was absolute, beds were as hard as duty itself, and luxury existed more to impress others than to alleviate your own discomfort. In theory, being king was the pinnacle. In practice, it meant waking up every day inside a damp castle, surrounded by people calling you Majesty, while you tried to remember if you were still a person or just a raw symbol in human flesh. Stone walls sucked away the heat, and the royal mantle weighed as if power were stitched right into the fabric. The silence of royal mornings wasn't peace, it was just the echo of obligation. The throne was always there, waiting for someone tired enough to sit down and feign control. You commanded everyone, except yourself. Before we step into this freezing castle, let's go through the ritual. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's on the other side, listening to these medieval curiosities that nobody asked for, but everyone loves. And of course, click that like button now. It helps the video reach more people who enjoy a boring story to sleep to. Now turn off the light, adjust your pillow, and come with me. You're about to wake up as a king, but don't expect any rest. You wake before the sun, not because you want to, but because someone decided royalty needs to suffer early. The room is too large, too cold, and quiet enough to amplify the sound of your own breathing. The stone walls seem to sweat, as if the castle itself is alive and tired too. Heavy curtains filter a grey light, the kind of clarity that illuminates nothing, only betraying the humidity. The bed is a monument to rigidity, sheets of rough linen, lumpy straw pillows, and a fur blanket that weighs as much as guilt. The straw mattress sinks where you sleep, and the wood creaks, as if judging you for another night of royal insomnia. Sometimes something moves inside the bedding. It might be a rat, it might be an insect, or it might just be your dignity trying to escape. You pretend it's just the straw breathing, and pray it stays that way. The most constant sound is your own heart, beating slowly beneath the fabric of your nightclothes. And right after, the distant noise of footsteps. There are always footsteps. Servants gliding like shadows, trying to appear invisible. You try to keep sleeping. Spoiler, it doesn't work. The door opens slowly. The cold air enters first, followed by a familiar smell, hot wax from candles, smoke, and the scent of crushed herbs. It is the standard odor of the court. The head servant enters with the same care as one carrying a relic or a corpse. He kneels, leans the torch against the wall, and whispers something like, "Your Majesty." You don't answer. Answering too soon gives power to those who woke up first. He lights more candles. The light spreads shyly, revealing what the darkness hid. The ceiling blackened by smoke, tapestries rippling in the wind, and a corner of the wall covered in mold, discreetly disguised with embroidered fabric. Luxury here is just decoration for discomfort. The routine begins. Two servants approach the bed and wait. One holds a metal basin with water cold enough to make even a saint complain. The other holds a towel that has seen better days and perhaps 3 previous kings. It smells of history and a little bit of mildew. You sit up slowly, your body heavy, head throbbing from last night's wine or simply from the weight of existing. The crown sits on the bedside table, looking at you like a silent reminder that rest is temporary. The water touches your face. It is freezing, cruel, and absolutely necessary. Royalty does not awaken with delicacy, it awakens with thermal shock. The rough cloth scrubs your face, neck, and hands. It doesn't clean. It only redistributes the dirt in a democratic way. Spoiler, this is how you take a bath. You take a deep breath, but the air isn't exactly fresh. It tastes of iron and smoke. The castle sleeps, but it never renews itself, and neither does the smell. Meanwhile, more servants enter. No one speaks loudly, no one looks you in the eye. The routine of dressing the king is almost a mass. Every gesture is a silent prayer. One holds the thick wool stockings, another adjusts the tight trousers. A third brings the embroidered tunic smelling of incense and the weight of responsibility. Everything is ceremonial. Even breathing seems part of a protocol. The fabrics rasp against the skin, cold at first, then stifling. The air becomes heavy with the dry sound of buckles, metals, and chains. The clothes are symbolic armor. Each layer distances you a little more from your own body. A servant adjusts your collar and avoids facing your face. Another checks your boots, still damp from last night. You feel the humidity rising up your legs and think for a brief second that a barefoot peasant might be more comfortable than a dressed king. While they work, the oldest servant approaches with a silver pitcher. Inside is wine diluted with warm water, the medieval substitute for coffee. The first sip is bitter, the second mandatory. Outside, the sound of bells announces the start of the day. The bells are the world's alarm clock. None of them ring for you, but they all remind you that nothing happens without your signature. Even the sunrise, they say, needs your symbolic approval. You know it's not true. The sun rises with or without a king. The steward mumbles something about appointments. There are always appointments. The council waits. The chronicler awaits. The bishop has arrived. The agenda is just a list of obligations disguised as authority. You merely nod, the automatic gesture of someone who rules more by habit than by will. The beard is combed. The hair is arranged with almond oil and the smell of a church. The comb scratches the scalp, pulling out strands along with your patience. As the servant finishes, you look into the polished metal mirror, a cloudy surface reflecting a tired face, discolored by the soft light. There is no glory there, only dark circles and memories. The king's face is a political construction. The less emotion, the more respectable. The final tunic is placed, red, heavy, embroidered with golden threads that scratch the fabric like scars. The gold shines just enough to remind you that someone died of hunger because of it. You are ready, but not awake. The servant announces the meal. A king's breakfast is not quite a breakfast. It is a ceremony of intestinal resistance. Cold meat, hard bread, enough to knock out a tooth, and light wine, which is just an elegant name for suspicious-colored water. The servants wait for the right moment to pretend they aren't breathing. You aren't there yet, but you already taste the metallic flavor of routine. With every gesture, the throne seems more distant and your own body heavier. Ruling, after all, is a species of administrative prison with a buffet. The air now smells of melting wax. The candles diminish. The day begins to infiltrate through the cracks. The servant collects the basin. The sound of sloshing water is almost poetic, an echo of what remains of your humanity. You stand up, your muscles protest. The mantle drags on the floor, scratching the cold stone. Every step is a reminder of the burden you helped build. The steward holds the door. Before leaving, you cast one last look at the room. The unmade bed looks like a defeated throne. The curtains sway slowly, as if the wind were bowing. It is just a room, but somehow it is also the entire kingdom, damp, heavy, and impossible to escape. You walk down the corridor. The sound of footsteps echoes, multiplying your presence until it sounds like 10 kings walking. The walls display ancient coats of arms and worn tapestries, each telling stories of those who came before and how everything ends the same. The air is cold, but familiar. The smell of wet stone is the perfume of monarchy. You continue, surrounded by servants who dare not cross your shadow. They walk behind as if royalty itself had a scent they didn't want to contaminate. Every step is calculated, every look is measured. Etiquette is an invisible prison, and protocol is the chain that binds the soul. You don't remember the last time you laughed or cried. Those things don't match the crown, nor the collar that itches, nor the tunic that prickles. Being king is basically a social allergy with a noble title. The corridor ends at a spiral staircase, and down below the smell changes. Warm bread, fireplace smoke, muffled voices. It is the kitchen, the place where the day begins for those who live without titles. You never go there, but the aroma reaches you like a distant promise of humanity. Hunger doesn't arrive, only duty. You turn right. The table is already set. The meal awaits you. Another act in a theatre without applause. The king awakens, but the man still sleeps, and the faithful castle continues breathing for him. The hall is not grandiose, as stories would make it seem. It is just a wide room with a low ceiling and full of smoke, where the cold never completely leaves. The fireplace tries to fight the morning, but the small flame barely reaches your fingertips. The air smells of damp wood and old grease. The table sits in the center, without tablecloths or adornments. Only wood marked by years of identical meals. A clay plate, a bowl of thin broth made from bones boiled until they turned into a memory, and a piece of dark bread, hard on the edges and damp in the middle. The kind of texture that makes even a tooth rethink its career. Beside it, a small plate with cold meat from the night before and a hunk of cured cheese, salty enough to last through a winter. The pitcher of diluted wine, or on simpler days, weak beer, replaces water. Safer, more bitter. No exotic fruits or golden banquets. Power for now still chews on humility. You sit down slowly, feeling the chill of the chair pierce through the tunic fabric. The oldest servant approaches, pours the broth, and retreats with a slight nod. He neither speaks nor looks you in the eye. Speaking to the king without being summoned is still seen as a minor sin, punished only by fear. Steam rises from the bowl. It smells of boiled bone, onion, and a little salt. The smell is the same as always. The aroma of someone surviving, not living well. You pick up the rustic, cracked wooden spoon and stir the broth before tasting. The flavor is lukewarm, metallic, almost seasoning-free. Still, it is enough. In the early Middle Ages, luxury is eating while seated. The bread is dense, heavy, made of barley and rye, the type eaten day to day, even inside castles. The crust is hard, and the center damp enough to raise suspicion. You tear it with effort, dip it in the broth and wait for it to soften. A duel between the bread and time. Chewing is manual labor, eating is a duty. The king feeds the body to continue reigning, not for pleasure, and the bread apparently takes no pleasure in cooperating either. Outside, the wind slips through cracks in the wall. It enters in soft waves, carrying the distant sound of stables, the neighing of horses, and the metallic clinking of tools. The castle wakes slowly, but the day already demands decisions. You take a sip of the diluted wine. It is light, acidic, and lukewarm, made from what was left of the harvests and mixed with water to make it last. There is no pleasure in it, only safety. Drinking wine is trusting that for one day you won't die of thirst. The servants watch from afar. Two simple men covered in coarse tunics, attentive to every movement. They wait for a gesture, an order, a scolding, but nothing happens. The king's meal, despite the title, is silent and brief. No speeches, no banquet, just the repeated ritual of feeding the body before the burden of government. The fire crackles, and a spark escapes to the floor. One of the servants hurries over, stomps quickly and puts it out. No one speaks. The sound of shoes echoes and vanishes. Everything returns to silence, as if the castle itself preferred the sound of breathing to that of words. You lift your head and observe the soot-covered ceiling. The smoke from the fireplace rises slowly, spreads and disappears toward the cracks in the roof. The smell of burning mixes with the bread, creating a perfume that, in a way, is already part of your existence. Royalty smells of charcoal and dampness. A servant brings more bread. You refuse with a slow wave. Hunger isn't the problem. Appetite fled years ago. Eating has become a habit, not a pleasure. The taste repeats, the day repeats. And luxury, when it exists, only serves to remind you how much everything still depends on the weather and the climate. The servant collects the empty bowl and cuts a piece of the cured cheese resting on the table. He slices it with care, offers it on a wooden plate, and you accept one. The taste is salty, strong, almost acidic, the kind of cheese that survives wars and perhaps participated in one. It lasts for months and demands courage, faith, and a strong stomach to continue reigning after eating it. For a moment, your thoughts wander. You imagine the peasants in the field eating dark bread and thin broth, while at your table the bread is lighter, the cheese is cured, and wine replaces water. The difference isn't in what is eaten, but in how much and how. The king tastes the same world, just with more seasoning and less hunger. The throne is a slightly cleaner version of the floor. The wine goblet is already empty, and the attentive servant hurries to bring another pitcher, this time with weak beer made by the monks of the neighboring monastery. The liquid bubbles weakly, reflecting the fireplace flame. You drink another sip, slowly this time, watching the fire move inside the pitcher. The reflection seems alive, and for the first time today, something inside the castle moves without permission. You run a hand over your beard, feel the roughness of the skin, and realize how much your face has aged. Ruling dries the body from the inside, like wind dries clothes hung in the courtyard. There is power, yes, but there is no rest. The youngest servant approaches, hesitates, and finally speaks. His voice is low, trembling, as if apologizing for existing. A messenger from a village has arrived bringing news of a conflict in the south. You merely nod. You don't want to hear it right now. Before the bread is finished, silence returns. The fireplace lets out a snap. The empty bowl cools on the table. Everything remains still. The only thing changing is the light, the shy sun starting to force its entry through the cracks in the windows. It is a clarity without heat, pale, revealing dust more than it illuminates the space. You stand up, your body is still heavy and your stomach indifferent. The servant pulls back the chair, and the sound of wood against stone echoes through the empty hall. Cold air invades the tunic, and the warmth of the fireplace already feels distant. The crown rests on the table beside the plate. The gold reflects the morning light, but the shine is weak, almost sad. You stare at it for a moment, then pick it up. The metal is freezing, and the touch sparks an involuntary shiver, a reminder that power always begins with discomfort. You place it on your head, adjust the mantle, and take a deep breath. The day starts now. Outside, the sound of bells marks the hour of prayer. Inside the castle, the silence is more solemn than any mass. The meal is over, but the taste and the weight remain. You walk to the door, the servant opens it, and the wind enters, carrying the smell of hay and mud from the courtyard. The cold cuts through your clothes, and for a moment, it feels more real than the entire rain. The king is fed, but empty. The satisfied castle goes back to swallowing the sound of footsteps and probably the smell of the cheese too. The council hall is on another floor, colder than the rest of the castle. The walls are rough stone and the ceiling low enough to make the air heavy. The sound of your steps is followed by others, 3, maybe 4, each belonging to a man who speaks of duty, faith, and taxes. The council is small, almost intimate. 2 nobles, a priest, and a scribe. And you, of course, pretending to rule. The court is still small. Governing here is more like chatting with acquaintances than commanding an empire. The table is too long for so few people, made of dark oak, worn at the edges, covered in rolled parchments and goose quills hardened by dried ink. The smell is of wax, old paper, and the concentrated sweat of men who haven't bathed since the last decree. The priest is the first to speak. He always is. He begins with a greeting to God, followed by a mention of the tithe and a prayer for the kingdom to prosper. The prayer part is beautiful. You feign attention. It is what is expected of a king. The trick is to nod your head every now and then with the look of someone who understood something divine and hope no one asks for your actual opinion. The noble to your left clears his throat and starts talking about the fields. He says the harvest was good, but the peasants are complaining about taxes. The other noble to the right retorts. He says peasants complain even when it rains, which is true and at the same time useless. The debate drags on. None of them realize you aren't really listening. You think about the morning soup, the smoke from the fireplace, how the silence of the hall was more bearable than the voices of power. The scribe in the background notes every word with almost touching care. He is the only one actually working. The sound of the quill scratching the parchment fills the air like a persistent insect. Every recorded phrase will be archived as a royal decision, even if nothing was decided. Politics in the early Middle Ages is a theatre without applause. Every act repeats until the audience forgets there is a plot. The priest continues speaking, now mentioning the shortage of monks in a nearby monastery, asking for more support from the crown and suggesting that God might be testing the kingdom. You just watch, because deep down, the whole kingdom feels like a test that never ends. One of the nobles talks about a conflict in a distant village, says the peasants are revolting because of debts. The other suggests sending soldiers. The priest cites patience and prayer. The scribe writes, and you, who should decide, simply say yes. It is the kind of decision that changes nothing, but sounds majestic enough to keep the theatre standing. The air in the room is dense. The torches burn poorly, releasing dark smoke. The smell of burnt wax dominates everything. The priest makes the sign of the cross. The older noble wipes sweat from his forehead. The scribe blows on the parchment to dry the ink. And you, motionless, observe them all as if looking at wooden dolls. At every meeting, the sensation is the same. The throne isn't a seat, it's a cage. The priest talks about faith again. It's the only theme that seems firm when everything else shakes. One of the nobles interrupts to discuss the price of salt. The other talks about tributes on cattle. You think about leaving, but protocol forbids it. A king does not abandon the council, only his body does. The conversation shifts to war. It always shifts to war. Not that there is a real one, but there is always a potential one. That is enough to justify more taxes. The priest takes the cue to say that every war needs divine blessing. The scribe takes notes again. You realize that, in practice, the scribe is the one who rules. Only he has a record of what was said, and no one ever rereads these papers. One of the nobles mentions the name of a neighboring lord, says he has been expanding borders suspiciously. In other words, he's taking land without asking permission. The other noble proposes sending a messenger. The priest suggests sending prayers. You think about sending silence. Spoiler, no one is going to solve anything. Time passes slowly inside the hall. The fire in the torches weakens, and the cold returns to dominate the room. You rest your chin on your hand and watch the priest move his lips. He speaks of sin, guilt, and penance, the theme of the morning, and so many other similar mornings. At a certain moment, the scribe stands up and reads the record of previous decisions. It sounds impressive. Words like, "it is ordered," "it is decreed," and "it is promulgated" fill the air, but the echo dies quickly. None of that ever happened. Power travels slowly, and wills even slower. You nod your head. It is the most used royal gesture after breathing. The noble understands it as approval. The priest interprets it as a blessing. The scribe notes it as a decree. Everyone happy, no one satisfied. A servant enters and places a tray with a pitcher of beer and 4 clay cups on the table. The men serve themselves, toast discreetly, and go back to speaking as if alcohol were divine inspiration. You drink too, but out of habit. The beer is lukewarm, the taste is the same as the morning's. The priest leans in and asks about the marriage of a distant niece, suggesting an alliance with another kingdom. You answer with a "we shall see," the word that in the royal vocabulary means never. The nobles smile, the priest thanks you, the scribe takes notes. The council continues, time stretches, the sun outside rises, but the hall remains dark. The air is thick. The smell of sweat and wax mixes with the dust of parchments. Every man's breathing sounds too loud. You get distracted watching the candle flame dancing in the wind. You think about what it would be like to live outside of here. Perhaps in a field with the smell of hay and the noise of cicadas. A dangerous thought for a king, but inevitable. The priest notices the daydream and speaks louder, perhaps to bring you back. He says, a king's glory lies in listening. You smile faintly. Glory, you think, is the most overrated word of the Middle Ages. The scribe notes something down. The sound of the quill is almost a whisper. The older noble asks about taxes again. The other talks of roads and bridges, things time will destroy before they are finished. The priest prays, you yawn, and the scribe registers the yawn as royal approval. A simple gesture, but enough to keep the meeting alive for another half hour. The council drags on until the sun reaches the cracks in the windows. The light enters pale, cutting through the smoky air and illuminating the face of every tired man. None of them realize the meeting ended before it even began. You stand up slowly. The sound of the chair dragging is almost a scream. The men bow. The priest gives thanks. The scribe rolls up the parchments. The nobles feign reverence. Everything happens in ritualistic silence, as if boredom itself were sacred. You walk to the door, and the cold air of the corridor feels like relief. Outside, the sound of the wind replaces the voices. The castle breathes again. The council is left behind, repeating words no one will remember. Power, after all, is just a conversation that never ends. And while the echo of voices fades, you think about the day's next appointment, a parade of flattery, promises, and fake smiles. Spoiler, it's going to get worse. It always gets worse, but at least the beer is free. The council is over, but the day isn't. Now comes the most tiring part. The audiences, nobles who command nothing but love to look important. The corridor is cold and damp. The sound of boots echoes. The wind shakes the tapestries. Even the castle seems to be waiting for something. Outside, the wind beats against the windows and makes the thick cloth of the tapestries move slowly, as if time were also waiting. The steward opens the door with effort. The creaking of hinges is the day's first sign of life. Inside, half a dozen nobles are already waiting for you. None of them smile for real. They are middle-aged men, wrapped in wool and leather, with eyes that measure every gesture. Their beards are thick, their fingers full of rings that don't shine, because the castle soot covers everything. Each one bows at a different angle, testing the limit between respect and convenience. You enter, they speak almost in a chorus, "Majesty." The sound is synchronized and fake, like a chant practiced too much. The oldest steps forward, adjusts his cloak, and begins the speech. He speaks of fidelity, honor, and eternal friendship. 3 words that in practice mean, "I want more land." Before he finishes, the second interrupts to say he brought gifts, a sword, a horse, and a promise. All of this together and none of it sincere. The sword is rusty, the horse lame, and the promise, as always, only serves to decorate the speech. You listen, or pretend to listen. The trick is the same. The air in the hall smells of wet wool and aromatic herbal oil. A useless attempt to disguise the smell of sweat. The result is a perfume that seems invented to punish the royal sense of smell. The torches crackle on the walls, and their heat barely reaches the center of the room where you stand. The sensation is of being surrounded by people who smile and stones that judge. The youngest noble speaks now. His voice is soft, too polite to be trusted. He praises your government, your wisdom, your gaze. He uses big, empty words as if the kingdom were a poem and not a collection of debts. The praise lasts longer than the harvest. You nod your head. It is the universal gesture of bored royalty. The scribe in the corner notes everything expressionlessly. He writes the words like someone digging a grave, slowly, methodically, and knowing that in the end, nothing will bloom from there. Perhaps the parchment will later serve to wrap fish at the market, if anyone has the courage to read the content. The first noble finishes speaking and smiles, a tense smile that looks more like a threat disguised as gratitude. The second steps forward, saying the nobility's loyalty is unshakable. The third agrees, and the fourth reinforces it, repeating exactly the same words with a different intonation. Spoiler: no one is loyal to anyone. You observe each face. One of them avoids your gaze. Another grips the hilt of his sword too firmly. Politics in the early Middle Ages is a game without a board. The pieces move by instinct, and the king never has all the plays. A servant brings more wine now for the new guests. The liquid is dark and sour, served in clay cups because metal is expensive, and gold is a luxury reserved for coronations and funerals. The nobles accept, toast, and feign joy. Wine drips onto the floor, and no one bends down to clean it. The sound of the toast echoes shortly. Then silence. The kind of silence that comes before requests. The first of them breaks the pause with a new compliment. Says the kingdom prospers under your leadership, but a brief war could unite the people. The second agrees. The third pretends to think. The fourth is already preparing a list of personal advantages. You feel the weight of the crown, literal and figurative. While they speak, one of them approaches the fireplace to warm himself. The fire reflects in his eyes, and for an instant the image seems too symbolic. Loyalty is this, a flame that warms while it serves, but burns if you get too close. The conversation continues. Names of distant enemies are cited. Vague plans for alliances are suggested. Promises are made and forgotten in the same sentence. The wine circulates. The room begins to seem more alive. The tone of voices rises. Laughter becomes looser. You haven't laughed yet, and everyone notices. Laughing at the wrong time is dangerous. Never laughing is worse. The most talkative noble tries a joke about the new tax collector. It is indecent, poorly told, and too long. Everyone laughs anyway. That type of tense laughter that happens when the joke is bad, but the man has an army. The sound of laughter resonates through the stone walls and dies quickly. The castle doesn't like improvised joy. You force a smile, the same one you use at coronations, treaties, and dinners. The kind of smile that doesn't show teeth and doesn't have a soul. The youngest takes advantage of the mood and approaches, proposing a hunt. Says the people would love to see the king riding again, leading men, showing strength. The priest isn't present, but you can almost hear the sermon that would follow. Vanity is a sin. Still, accepting is easier than refusing. You agree. The scribe notes it down. The noble smiles. The game continues. While they speak, you notice the details. The way one leans against the other when arguing, the quick look exchanged before suggesting any idea, the haste to agree with whatever you say. Everything has a rehearsed cadence, as if the court were a traveling theatre and the script the same for generations. Spoiler: it is. The air gets heavy with the smell of spilled wine and burnt wool. The fire in the fireplace has already diminished, and the torchlight flickers. The hall seems smaller, more stifling. The nobles keep talking, but the words lose meaning. They sound like a constant buzz, a mechanical prayer in honor of themselves. You lean back, the royal chair creaks. Your body aches, your shoulder weighs down, your mind seeks distraction. What they call power, you call social imprisonment, with an occasional banquet. The oldest asks permission to speak of taxes. It is always him. He uses terms like necessary, urgent, for the good of the realm. You know what that means. More coins that will never reach the royal coffers. The others agree, each trying to look more patriotic than the other. It is almost beautiful to watch, were it not tragic. You pretend to reflect, just to stretch the silence. Silence is your favorite weapon. It confuses, intimidates, and sometimes makes it look like there is wisdom where there is only fatigue and a slight desire to go back to bed. The youngest noble rushes to change the subject, speaks of the northern border, of invaders, of honor, big words, small results. You interrupt him calmly and say the kingdom already has enough problems inside its own walls. The tone is low, almost gentle, but the message is clear. The scribe records the sentence as a royal pronouncement. Maybe one day someone will read it and call it a prophecy. The wine runs out, the air cools again, the conversation dies. One of the nobles tries to approach to greet you. The gesture is clumsy, forced. He extends a hand, hesitates, and retreats. Doubt is the true bond among the powerful. You stand up, the chair drags on the floor, and the sound makes everyone stop. The men bow, one of them trips in his haste. The castle returns to respectful silence, the kind of silence that says more than all the promises made inside there. You leave the hall without looking back. Your steps echo long, firm, and the cold air of the corridor feels like a consolation. Outside, the sound of voices diminishes until it vanishes, replaced by the distant crackling of torches. The nobles probably stay behind, resuming the subject of wine or the tax collector. They always stay. And you, walking alone through the castle, realize the constant irony of the throne. The higher the title, the narrower the space. Spoiler, power remains the same, only the smell of the wine changes. Sometimes sourer, sometimes more expensive, but always served lukewarm. The castle corridor seems longer at night. The sound of torches pops with every step, and the air brings that known smell of wax and wool, the smell of royal loneliness. Outside, the wind sings low, and the echo passes through stones. You return to your chambers, but you already know the bedroom isn't a refuge, it's another throne room, just with curtains. The queen awaits you. She is in her own quarters, receiving you not out of affection, but out of protocol. She sits motionless, reading some religious text she likely memorized months ago. Her dress is heavy, her hair carefully pinned, her gaze fixed on the flames of the fireplace. When you enter, she stands, gives a slight curtsy, and calls you my lord. Neither approaches the other. The marriage, after all, is a political alliance that aged quickly. She came from afar, the daughter of a feudal lord with more armies than affection. You married out of necessity, and since then you share the same roof but not the same silence. Hers is respectful, yours is tired. The air in the room is dense, the fire burns weak, and the heat doesn't reach the center. The large bed takes up half the space, covered in embroidered fabrics that try to feign harmony. Couples holding hands, sweet looks, and impossible smiles, stuff for people who clearly were never married to a king. She asks if the council was long. You answer that it was enough. It is always enough. Conversations between king and queen are measured in short phrases, like someone walking on thin ice. Intimacy died before it was born, suffocated by politics and etiquette. The sound of the wind passes through the window, the candles flicker. The queen approaches just enough for her perfume, made of herbs and honey, to disguise the smell of the castle. The gesture is soft, rehearsed, distant. She says the people seem content. You reply that the people always seem something. A silence settles in, familiar, comfortable even. It is the kind of silence that fills more than words. You observe her. Her face carries the serenity of women who learn to give up with elegance, dignity and apathy. She knows the role she plays and fulfills it perfectly, smiles at ceremonies, prays in chapels, sits by your side at banquets. No emotion crosses the limit allowed by protocol. Sometimes you try to remember how it was at the beginning, the arranged marriage, the discreet ceremony, the sour wine, the repeated blessings. You remember the light touch of her hand, cold as the crown's metal. It was meant to be the start of a dynasty. Deep down, it became the start of a prolonged silence. The servant enters, places a pitcher of wine on the table, and leaves without raising his eyes. Medieval servants were trained to disappear, and they achieved this with more talent than the couple's love. The queen approaches, pours 2 goblets. The liquid is dark, thick, the same that seals treaties and anesthetizes consciences. You toast with a small gesture, without words. It is the ritual of every night. You drink first. The wine warms the throat and brings a false sensation of life. She drinks after, slowly, looking at the fire. The reflection of the flames illuminates her face. Beautiful but distant, like everything that is an obligation. The queen talks about the son being educated by the bishop, says he learns quickly, speaks Latin, and already repeats prayers alone. You agree, though you barely remember the sound of his voice. In the early Middle Ages, heirs belonged to the church before they belonged to the family. She asks if she can visit him next spring. You promise to think about it. Silence returns. The wine cools, the fire fades little by little as if understanding the mood. The castle is huge, but the loneliness inside is the size of a room. You look around. Embroidered curtains, crosses, tapestries, candles, everything sacred, nothing human. Power demands devotion, not tenderness. The queen talks about the weather, the cold, the wind passing through the gates. She speaks to say something, not because it matters. You respond with a slight nod. The fatigue isn't physical, it is existential. Even silence seems too heavy to sustain alone. She goes back to the chair and picks up the book again. Night reading, perhaps psalms, perhaps pretense. The sound of pages turning is the only living movement in the room. You watch, but don't interrupt. Marriage is this, 2 presences living together in a low voice so as not to wake up destiny. You walk to the window. The sky is dark, starless. The wind blows hard, making the candles bow. Outside, the kingdom sleeps. Inside here, the king and queen guard their own silence. The room seems bigger at night. The echo of the walls creates a sensation of distance between you, even being a few steps away. Marriage, after all, is the kind of alliance that brings kingdoms closer and separates people. Politics and affection never shared the same bed. She closes the book, says she is going to rest. You agree. It is the most intimate dialogue of the day. She blows out the candles, lies on her side, and becomes motionless. You remain seated, watching the fire that insists on not dying. The sound of the wind continues outside, as if trying to remind you that life exists beyond the walls. The wine runs out. The empty cup reflects the glow of the fire, and for an instant seems to look back. You think about when love became a subject for troubadours and ceased to be a thing for kings. The silence grows until the sound of her breathing fills the room. You lie down, feel the cold of the stone on the floor, the weight of the blankets, the emptiness of words. The marriage, like the kingdom, continues, functions, but does not live. It endures, but does not warm. And when sleep comes, it comes slowly, like someone entering a temple. The last thing you see is the fire diminishing, shadows dancing on the ceiling, and the golden reflection of the crown forgotten on the table. The symbol of union, the weight of 2 names, and silence, the only one that still rules without contest. Spoiler: love was not part of the treaty. The day began like all the others, grey and lazy. The sun spent the entire time fighting the clouds and lost. Now, in the late afternoon, it tries to shine through the fog, covering the castle courtyard. The wind brings the smell of hay, smoke, and roasting meat. It is a sign that the banquet is almost ready. And by banquet, understand a ritual of overeating while everyone pretends to be happy about it. The hall has been prepared since early on. Servants climbed stairs carrying platters, lamps, tallow candles, breads, and pitchers of wine. Tables were aligned, benches cleaned with damp cloths, and a handful of herbs thrown on the floor to disguise the smell of people. The result is a strange perfume, a mixture of grease, mint, and sweat. Classic royalty. You enter the hall with the same enthusiasm as someone going to pay taxes. The nobles are already there, standing, waiting for the king so they can sit. The queen by your side maintains composure, her face serene, her gaze distant, and that air of someone present out of religious obligation. The bishop adjusts his robe, makes the sign of the cross, and thanks God for the abundance. A gesture that disguises well the fact that half of what is on the table came from tithes. You sit, and the sound of chairs being pulled echoes together. Everyone imitates you, as if eating were only permitted after your movement. Servants hurry, platters begin to circulate. The first dish is a thick broth of onion and boiled bones. The smell is strong, the taste even worse, but no one dares to show it. Eating in silence is part of etiquette. Then come the meats. Deer, rabbit, boar, all hunted, hung, smoked, and now submerged in sauce. The cook exaggerated the vinegar again, and the result is a meal that burns more than it comforts, but it is expensive, and therefore it is praised. You chew slowly. Disguising the lack of appetite, the nobles converse among themselves. They speak of harvests, of borders, of problems they never solve, with every sentence a contained laugh, a raised goblet. It is a theatre repeated for centuries. You watch in silence, knowing that none of them are there out of friendship. Everyone has something to ask for, and that is the true menu of the court. Music begins in a corner of the hall, a rustic lute and a bone flute, both hesitant. The sound is mediocre, but no one cares. The guests feign joy and say it is a divine melody. The bishop bows his head in blessing, already redder than pious. The queen watches in silence, with that look of someone who has seen all the music in the world, and none is worth the effort. The servants bring more wine. The dark, thick liquid is poured into clay cups. The wine is sweet, almost syrupy, and the flavor covers any memory of stale meat. You drink a sip, and the body relaxes enough to endure the rest of the farce. Around you, the noise increases. Louder laughter, improvised toasts, political promises disguised as joy. One of the younger nobles stands and asks for the floor. He speaks about the glory of the kingdom, the prosperous future, and thanks God for the enlightened reign. The bishop raises his hands in blessing, and the rest bow their heads. It is a generic speech, the kind that serves for any king in any century. You thank him with a discreet nod, and the hall returns to the controlled noise of always. Spoiler, no one will remember this speech tomorrow. Food keeps arriving. White bread for the nobles, dark for the rest. Dried fruits, meat pies, cheeses hard enough to serve as weapons. The smell of grease invades the air, and the heat from the lamps and tallow candles begins to spread through the hall. A servant drops a piece of meat, kneels to clean it without raising his eyes, and the sound of his panting breath mixes with the laughter. You observe everything calmly, trying to appear attentive. That is the secret, to appear. The firm gaze, the raised chin, the discreet smile. Inside, only boredom. Outside, the image of one who rules and digests at the same time. The queen drinks little, maintaining elegance even in the heat and chaos. Every now and then, she exchanges a look with you. It isn't affection, it's protocol. Being side by side is part of the role, but it brings no one closer. Deep down, marriage is just another table where everyone eats in silence. The music changes, the volume rises, and one of the nobles taps the bench with his fingers. Others follow him, feigning excitement. The bishop takes advantage of the mood and proposes a new toast. This time to faith and order. Everyone raises their goblets, says amen, and drinks another round. Wine trickles down the corner of some mouths. No one notices. The banquet advances. The sound, the smell, the heat. Everything increases. And along with all this comes exhaustion, the heavy body, the distant mind, the feeling that power is just another type of prison. A cleaner one, but still a prison. You think about getting up, but protocol does not yet permit it. Only when the bishop finishes giving thanks and the oldest noble closes with a formal salutation. When it finally happens, you stand up slowly. The hall falls silent. Everyone follows your movement. It is the end of the meal, the end of the theatre. Servants begin to collect the platters, scraps of meat, bread, spilled wine. The air remains thick, hot, heavy. The smell of supper will take days to leave the castle stones. You take a last look at the hall. The lamps and tallow candles flicker, the smoke rises, and the guests are already starting to leave, with the same fake respect of those who can't wait to go home. The bishop approaches, bows, and murmurs something about the Lord's blessing. You reply with a small smile. The Queen has already retired, and the hall feels empty, even while full of people. You walk to the door, the sound of footsteps muffled by the straw scattered on the floor. Outside, the afternoon wind has turned cold. The sun disappears behind the hills, and the castle plunges into silence. Another fulfilled banquet, another flavorless tradition, another proof that even abundance can be tiring. Spoiler, luxury is only beautiful to those who don't have to participate in it. The castle wakes slowly. The morning air enters through the window cracks like a reminder that the cold always arrives first. Outside, the sun tries to cut through the fog. Inside, servants light torches, collect the remains of the previous night, and sweep away the smell of the banquet. Dry wine still stains the floor of the great hall, and kitchen smoke insists on spreading through the corridors. The king wakes early, not because he wants to, but because duty drags him back to routine. After a quick wash in the basin and clean clothes, he heads to the audience chamber. The sound of boots echoes on the cold stones, accompanied by the rustling of servants' tunics. Every step has the same weight as every other day, predictable, necessary, without any pleasure. The Hall of Justice is simple, damp and dark. The ceiling is low, the floor covered in straw, and the air carries the smell of wax and mold. In the center, the oak chair made to look like a throne, but without the comfort or the gold. Behind it, a tapestry with the kingdom symbol tries to lend dignity to the environment. The king sits. Around him, the councillors take their places. A bishop, two nobles, and a scribe too thin for the task of noting the weight of decisions. The guards bring in the first accused, a man with a dirty face, torn clothes, and trembling hands. They say he stole some grain from a barn. The crime is simple, but the ritual demands pomp. The bishop begins with a long prayer, the kind that serves more to test patience than faith. The king listens in silence, gazing lost in the weak flame of the torch. When the prayer ends, the peasant speaks. He says he stole because his wife and son hadn't eaten in days. He speaks in a low voice, but without apology. The bishop interrupts him, reminding him that hunger is a divine trial. One of the nobles nods, satisfied with the phrase. The other wipes his nose on his cloak and tries to look interested. The scribe notes everything, though no one will ever read the record. He just scratches the parchment with that dry, customary sound. It is the official noise of justice, light, constant, and useless. The king observes the man. He speaks little, but thinks too much. He thinks of the wheat stocked in the court barns, the bountiful tables, and the plates still full from the day before. He thinks about how abundance weighs more than misery. The second judgment is even more predictable. A woman brought by guards accused of healing with herbs and prayers. Witchcraft, they say, The bishop approaches, holds a crucifix before her and asks if she renounces the devil. She replies that she never met him. The silence that follows is the kind of silence the church loves. The king asks her name, she answers, asks what she did. She says she only used plants, asks if she believes in God. She answers yes, but seems tired of the question. The bishop steps back, offended by the tone. The nobles whisper among themselves. The scribe keeps writing with his quill tilted and his face pale. The trial isn't about what she did, but about what she represents. A poor, autonomous woman, a triple error in a world that loves to blame those who have no defense. The king sighs, rests his hands on his knees, and decides without hesitation. The man returns the wheat and works a week in the local lord's field. The woman surrenders the herbs to the church and prays for forgiveness. Everyone seems satisfied. Justice served. The bishop gives thanks for royal piety, says mercy is a divine gift. One of the nobles comments that the people will see the king's wisdom. The other adds that balanced decisions keep the kingdom firm. The scribe finishes the record and blows on the fresh ink, as if preserving something important. In the end, the result is always the same. Punishments light enough to seem like kindness, harsh enough to teach fear. The next audience is about taxes. A farmer complains about the collection. A collector swears he only followed orders. The bishop speaks of obedience. The noble speaks of duty, and the king merely nods. Governing is repeating the same answers with different words. When the last case ends, the hall seems even smaller. The air is heavy, the smell of damp straw, the smoke of torches already starting to diminish. The bishop stands, makes the sign of the cross, and gives thanks again. The nobles stand together, a second late, as always. The scribe collects the parchments and ties everything with a linen thread. The king remains seated for a few seconds. The silence weighs. The distant sound of wind enters through the narrow window. Outside, the sun is high but weak. The castle remains like yesterday, still, grey, old. He stands up slowly, adjusts his mantle and walks to the door. The corridor is empty. The sound of footsteps echoes on the stone floor. At every turn, a servant bows, avoiding his gaze. No one speaks. Justice, after all, is a spectacle no one wants to discuss afterward. The bishop catches up and starts talking about faith. Says God watches kings with special attention, that the throne is an altar, and that power comes with the obligation of repentance. The king just listens without answering. He already knows the way by heart, from the judgment room to the chapel. Always the same path, always the same feeling of being watched by something invisible and impatient. The walk is short, the silence long. The castle seems colder now. Wind passes through cracks in the windows and makes the torches oscillate. Outside, the sound of bells announces midday. Inside, the weight of the morning hasn't left. The king arrives at the chapel door and stops for a moment, breathes deep, smells the incense coming from inside, a mixture of faith and smoke. It is the same smell that accompanies all well-organized sins. Justice has ended. Guilt begins. Spoiler, even those who command need forgiveness, and the castle continues motionless, as if nothing had happened. And yet, when justice ends, silence brings no relief. It only changes shape. Where before there were voices begging for forgiveness, now there are men waiting for orders. The sound of the corridor is the same, footsteps, iron murmurs, but the air feels heavier. War always starts like this, with people speaking softly, as if the volume could change destiny. The council room is prepared. Map open on the table, stones marking fiefdoms, small charcoal lines indicating borders no one respects. Of course, the bishop is still there, pretending neutrality. Two councillors await him, one smelling of leather, the other smelling of fear. The sweating messenger keeps his head low, hands trembling, holding the parchment that carries the news. You sit down, and the sound of the chair scraping the floor echoes like thunder. The scribe dips the quill in ink. The messenger speaks. The words are short but sufficient. Invasion, border, loss, those 3 words any king hears more times than he would like. The council stirs. One noble argues for immediate war. The other speaks of prudence. The bishop speaks of divine will. The scribe writes without raising his eyes. Everything sounds familiar, like a play staged for generations. You listen, observe the map, and think about what it really means to defend the kingdom. Spoiler, it is almost never about the kingdom. Men speak of honor, but what is on the table are numbers, provisions, men, horses, time. Glory is merely the varnish. The rest is calculation. The bishop cites a passage about courage. The older noble replies that courage is expensive and slow to arrive. The meeting turns into a cycle of recycled phrases and contradictory advice. You raise your eyes and observe the map. The blurred lines, the darkened trace, the names that change from generation to generation. Iron decides more than faith. The battlefield is far, but the smell of fear is already inside the room. The messenger still waits motionless. Sweat runs down his forehead. He knows every spoken word can change the destiny of dozens. The tired king takes a deep breath, observes the faces around him, and realizes power is just an echo of war. The generals aren't there, the soldiers much less, only fat men surrounded by maps and false certainties. The decision is made with a firm voice. Orders are given. An army must be gathered to the north, provisions collected, messengers sent. The scribe notes with precision. The bishop thanks God for inspiring courage, and the king, while speaking, feels the echo of his own voice sounding distant, as if the command came from another man. War moves in silence. The hall empties little by little. The bishop goes to pray. The nobles go to discuss details. The scribe goes to organize papers no one will read. The king stays. The map before him remains the same. Iron and blood only change places, but the drawing doesn't change. He touches the parchment with his fingers. The paper is rough, cold. The border marked with charcoal stains the skin. Outside, the courtyard begins to gain movement. The sound of horseshoes on the stone floor, the creaking of gates, the short shouts of soldiers being gathered. War, seen from afar, is just a sequence of noises. The smell of iron and smoke fills the air. The king watches from the narrow window. The wind brings the sound of hooves, the clinking of swords, the murmur of hurried prayers. The sun is already high, but seems weak. Flags flutter in the cold. The bishop blesses the banners. Soldiers kneel. Nobles speak of glory. It is a theater of rehearsed courage. You watch it all motionless. You know the real combat isn't that one, but what happens inside every gaze. The fear hidden under armor. Spoiler: no one returns a hero when the king stays watching. The sound of orders echoes. The army commander enters, kneels, receives the sign of the cross and the order to depart. The king hands over the ring, symbol of royal trust, and wishes God be with them. It is a repeated phrase, cold, faithless, spoken out of habit. The commander kisses the ring, stands, and leaves. The sound of boots diminishes until it disappears. Silence returns. The wind enters through the window and rocks the tapestry with the kingdom's coat of arms. The worn and patched cloth moves slowly as if waving to the void. The king runs a hand over his face and feels the fatigue that power does not allow to alleviate. War, after all, is also this: waiting for news that never arrives quickly and burying men you never met. The bishop returns, says the people pray for victory, that the Lord rewards the just. The king only responds with a look. The just rarely win, and the winner is rarely just, but no one says that out loud. The sound of bells arrives from the top of the tower. It is the afternoon toll. Smoke from the training field already covers the courtyard. Men and horses move. Dust rises, and the sky seems to swallow the horizon. The bishop speaks of blessings, the king thinks of numbers, the scribe of ink. Each one in silence fulfills their function. When the bishop retires, the hall returns to emptiness. Light crosses the window and cuts the map in half. Shadow covers the northern side, the same one that is now at war. The king observes the contrast and feels a slight shiver, perhaps cold, perhaps an omen. The sound of distant thunder comes from the hill. The wind increases, the torch fire flickers, the castle breathes heavily. And as if the war outside weren't enough, the king feels the other one, the one inside. The silent war between duty and nothingness, the one that needs no armies, only a conscience. Spoiler, this is the one that never ends. The map remains on the table, the ink still wet. The ring of royalty is now missing from his finger, and the round mark it left looks like a reminder that power also binds. The king closes his eyes for an instant. He doesn't sleep, only listens. The wind, the hooves, the iron, everything mixes together. The war departed, the throne remained. And as always, he who stays is the one who carries the greater weight. But war, even distant, leaves echoes within the walls. As the day ends, the castle seems to shrink. The air gets colder, the wind passes through the window cracks and tears small sparks from the torches. The noise from the courtyard diminishes, steps become more contained, and silence denser. Everything that was routine turns into waiting. Messages from the battlefront haven't arrived yet, and their absence weighs more than any defeat. The councillors feign calm. The bishop says silence is a sign of faith, but even he speaks more softly now. Every noise seems loaded with intention. The iron of doors, the sound of a key turning, the creaking of wood. Nothing is just what it seems. The king continues in the hall, watching the fire that insists on dwindling. The morning map is still on the table, papers piled up, the royal seal dry with red wax. The room is empty, but the air still holds the voices from before. It is curious how power smells of people, even when no one is there. Outside, the sky is closed up, the wind blows hard, and the sound of gate chains echoes down the corridor. Shadows move in a strange way, as if every torch flickered by its own will. The king stands up, walks to the window, and observes the courtyard. No light, only the distant ember of the last watchfire, and still, however motionless the castle seems, there is too much movement. Hurried steps, whispering voices, guards changing position before the hour. Conversations stop when the king passes, eyes look away, respect and fear begin to blur. There are days when power is a symbol, others a threat. The bishop appears again, like someone who doesn't know if he brings comfort or espionage. He speaks of prayers, of the importance of keeping faith, of the need for vigilance, and finally of confidence. Says there are rumors, people questioning orders, dissatisfied nobles, servants who comment too much. The war outside awakens greed inside. The king listens without changing expression. He expected it. The throne, after all, is made of mistrust. Without it, no reign lasts. The bishop suggests convening the council again in secret. Names are mentioned with care. A count who delayed grain shipments, another who praised the enemy aloud, a third who disappeared suddenly. The castle suddenly seems full of shadows with names. The king does not answer, merely looks at the coat of arms on the floor, reflected by the torchlight. The kingdom's colors deform in the reflection of melted wax. The flame moves, and the image seems alive. For an instant, everything representing security becomes unstable. The bishop withdraws, leaving silence again. The fire burns low, the air is cold, and the distant sound of the wind seems louder than it should be. The castle breathes slowly, but the king now does not. As if the weight of war weren't enough, there is the invisible burden of one who can trust no one. The throne is a chair surrounded by whispers. The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupts the thought. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. The echo seems to come from various sides, though it is only one. The king watches the door, but it doesn't open. The noise passes, diminishes, disappears. The mind does the rest. Eyes look for movement where there is only shadow. Ears catch breaths that might be the wind. Even the heart starts beating to the rhythm of suspicion. It is curious how fear behaves. The higher the title, the lower the tranquility. A servant enters hurriedly with a lamp and says the gates have been locked. Nothing more. His voice comes out nervous. His gaze avoids contact. The king merely nods. The servant leaves as quickly as he entered. The sound of the door closing echoes too loudly for a simple gesture. The fire dies, the room darkens, the shine of melted wax still reflects on the table, and the map remains there with its borderlines and ink stains. It is impossible not to notice the resemblance. The kingdom and the king's mind, both cracked from the inside. Time passes without warning. The sound of a crow outside cuts the silence. Then nothing else. The air stands still. Breathing is heavy. The throne, the coat of arms, the seal, everything seems to watch him back. Spoiler: no one sleeps peacefully when the enemy might be inside the castle. The king stands up, walks to the corridor, and every step is accompanied by the crackling of torches. The flame flickers, the wind enters through narrow windows, and the cold increases. The sound of chains outside continues. With every movement, the sensation is the same, being watched, even when alone. Paranoia is the secret tax of power, and yet, however safe everything seems, nothing really is. Trust in the early Middle Ages is a greater luxury than gold. The castle corridors are long and narrow. The sound of your own footsteps echoes and comes back with a delay, as if someone were following. No guard dares to speak. The king passes and everyone bows, but the reverence now sounds like a disguise. Back in the main hall, the fire has died completely. Only the weak light of a lamp remains. The flame sways with the wind passing under the door. The air is cold, and the silence almost solid. The king looks at the map one more time. The stain of melted wax covers the north. War outside and doubt inside. The throne to the side, the mantle hanging, the weight always the same. Spoiler: he who sleeps in power wakes surrounded by ghosts, and some are still breathing. The sound of the wind increases. A distant door closes with force. The whole castle seems to move slowly, like a living, tired creature. The king remains motionless. Fear doesn't leave, and silence returns, not as rest, but as a sentence. And as if the silence of the castle weren't enough, comes the sound of bells. 3 slow tolls that pass through walls and remind you that the night, however long it seems, still belongs to God. Outside, the wind mixes with the metallic echo. Inside, the king feels the sound hit his chest, as if he were being called. The corridor leading to the chapel is cold. Torches burn weakly, and the air carries the smell of damp stone and ancient incense. The stone floor returns the sound of every step. The castle at this hour seems different. Less kingdom, more temple. Even the guards walk slower, as if the silence itself commanded respect. The chapel door is ajar. The light from inside is weak, trembling, made of candles. The bishop is already waiting, kneeling before the altar. He stands when the king enters, gives a slight bow, and invites him to approach. No word is spoken, only the sound of flames and breathing. The altar is simple: a dark wooden cross, a chalice, 2 books, and the same smell that fills all churches: wax, stone, and reverence. Faith here is the only luxury that needs no display. The king kneels, the cold stone touches his knees, and silence envelops him. The bishop makes the sign of the cross, and his voice sounds calm, deep, dragged by habit. He speaks of sin, humility, forgiveness, words the king has heard 1,000 times, but which never sound the same when conscience weighs heavy. And yet, even without saying anything, the mind does not quiet down. War, fear, council voices, faces of the judged, everything returns. Power is a throne too heavy for those who believe and too light for those who forget. The bishop asks if the king has anything to confess. The tone is not of judgment, but of compassion. The king takes a while to answer, speaks softly, as if fearing to wake his own mistakes. He speaks of decisions that cost lives, of orders he himself doesn't understand, of nights without peace. The bishop listens in silence, sometimes closing his eyes like someone praying without words. When the king finishes, the bishop places a hand on his head. His voice is firm but tranquil. He speaks of repentance, of path, of purpose. There is no criticism, only consolation. Faith, after all, is the only power that needs no crown. Spoiler, even the strongest king needs forgiveness. The sound of candles mixes with the wind entering through cracks. Flames tremble, and their reflection dances on the cross. The bishop speaks of divine mercy and the weight that need not be carried alone. The king keeps his eyes open, fixed on the altar, and for an instant the world seems quiet. But silence also has a price. Confession cleanses, but does not erase. Faith comforts, but does not resolve. It is the kind of consolation that doesn't change facts, only the burden. The bishop finishes the blessing, makes the sign of the cross one more time, hands over a rosary, and recommends prayer. Says sleep will come when the heart is light. The king thanks him with a small, respectful nod. No words beyond that. The bishop withdraws slowly, leaving the chapel empty. The sound of footsteps disappears, and the wind takes its place. The flame of the candles continues trembling, insistent, as if the fire were also praying. The king remains kneeling. The floor is cold, but familiar. Stone doesn't judge, only listens. Hands rest on the rosary, and the sound of beads mixes with the breath of the wind. Every prayer is said in a whisper, almost voiceless, like someone speaking inward. Outside, the castle sleeps. Inside here, time seems to stop. The smell of incense is strong, enough to fill the entire air. There is a hard serenity in this environment, a calm that brings no rest, but order. And yet, even before the cross, the king feels the weight of the throne. Power in the early Middle Ages wasn't just government. It was responsibility over souls, over lands, over decisions that echoed beyond life. The king is the kingdom's most visible servant, and the most burdened too. Candles burn to the end. The last flame goes out slowly, leaving the smell of wax and smoke in the air. The rosary remains in his hands. The silence is total but not empty. Faith returns meaning to what power consumes. The king stands up slowly, looks one last time at the altar, and makes the sign of the cross. The remaining light is from the moon, crossing through the stained glass. The silvery reflection spreads across the floor and illuminates the coat of arms embroidered on the tunic. For an instant, the throne and faith seem to meet at the same point. The distant sound of wind returns. The castle breathes again. And as if forgiveness weren't enough, comes the reminder of life, that power without faith is ruin. But with faith, it is penance. The king leaves the chapel in silence. Night envelops him, and the echo of footsteps mixes with the prayer that still insists in his mind. The chapel is left behind, but the smell of incense still follows you. It is curious how even forgiveness has an aroma and lasts longer than relief. The corridor is cold, torches burn at their limit, and the sound of footsteps is the only proof that the castle still has life. A tired life, it is true, but alive. The wind enters through cracks like a thief who knows where to step. Every draught seems to whisper secrets no one asked to hear. The king continues among columns and tapestries that hang motionless, as if they had given up decorating anything. The grandeur of the stones only serves to amplify the echo of emptiness. And it is a generous emptiness. It is everywhere. in the rooms, in the voices that no longer echo, in the extinguished fireplaces, the kind of silence that screams. You realize that the castle without people looks like the perfect portrait of power. Immense, expensive, and completely useless when no one fills it. Even the throne there in the main hall seems smaller. Perhaps because without an audience, power loses half its grace. The fireplace fire has turned into shy embers. Wood crackles lazily, and the smell of smoke mixes with old wine and cold stone. The air is still, and the king still with it. He looks around and tries to remember the last time that hall held real laughter, probably before he was born. Royalty is an inheritance that comes with interest. In the corner, the crown rests on the red cloth. It shines little. Perhaps the gold got tired of feigning importance. The king approaches, touches the metal, and feels the cold rise through his fingers. It's curious how an object so heavy can symbolize something so fragile. Outside, the wind whistles, the kind of sound that seems to call someone by name, and you prefer not to find out if it is yours. The entire castle reacts with creaks and snaps. Every board, every nail, every chain has its own complaint. And yet, there is beauty in all this. A strange beauty, but present. The kind that only exists when the whole world is quiet. You pass by the council table. It is empty, except for the parchments left earlier. The candles burn to the end, and the wax hardened as if sealing boredom. A whole day of orders and decisions, and in the end, everything is reduced to silence and paper. It is proof that power talks a lot, but solves little. The king walks to the balcony. The night air is freezing, but not enough to wake him. Outside, the courtyard sleeps. Watch torches flicker, small and disciplined, like obedient stars. No sound of horses, no shouting, only the wind and the irregular flapping of the kingdom's flags. For an instant, it seems beautiful, and immediately after, sad. Like everything that is too beautiful at night. He leans his hands on the parapet. The stone is damp. The smell is the same as the morning, only more tired, and down below, the echo of the rain itself. Empty stables, corridors without servants, and a loneliness so great another castle could fit inside it. Spoiler, the throne is just a more expensive way of being alone. The wind picks up, the torch flame hesitates, and the gloom seems to swallow half the hall. The king goes back inside. The tapestries tremble. A cloth with the family crest almost comes loose, and he thinks for a second that maybe he should let it fall just to hear some sound that wasn't his own breathing. There is a type of ghost that casts no shadow. It just watches. The castle is full of them. Not the dead, but memories. Of the severe father, of the war won and forgotten, of the promise of glory that aged too quickly. Greatness, after all, rots too. It just takes longer than flesh. He crosses the hall and stops before the throne. The chair is huge, made of carved wood and iron. It weighs as if made of time. The seat is cold. No one sits there without paying the price. The king observes the reflection of the dying fire on the golden reliefs. The shine seems to pulse as if the throne breathed on its own. And in a way it really does, because the throne does not die. It only changes bodies. The irony is simple. Everyone wants power until they realize it doesn't come with rest. Outside, the sound of a distant gate closing. Then, nothing. No voice, no step, no bell. Only the sound of wood creaking, as if the castle were trying to remember what it was like to be a home before being a prison. The king walks to the center of the hall and looks around. Everything seems motionless, like a painting time itself forgot to finish. Solitude here has architecture, and yet, however heavy the silence, there is a discreet peace. It isn't comfort, it is surrender. The acceptance that power isn't noise or party, it is just the absence of choice disguised as command. The wind invades again, blowing out a candle. Darkness grows slowly. The king watches. The fire ends. The castle turns back to stone and power, just a memory surrounded by echoes. The castle remains still, but time does not. It enters in silence, like an infiltration no one sees coming. The king is still in the hall, surrounded by walls that have seen a lot. Younger kings, fuller parties, and hopes that lasted the time of a good harvest. The body, that one feels everything. The back aches, knees complain, and the cold air seems sharper than before. It is time's revenge on one who thought commanding people was the same as commanding the years. The throne is still there, equal, impassive. The same throne that has seen coronations, betrayals, and now watches the slow deterioration of its occupant. It is curious how power never ages, only the one who carries it. The king leans on the edge of the table. The wood creaks, the sound echoes through the empty hall, mixing with the crackling of embers. The mantle, once a symbol of greatness, now weighs as if made of stone. Gold stitched on the edges has lost its shine, as if even the metal got tired of feigning nobility. And still there is ceremony and fatigue. Even decay in royalty comes with rituals. Servants help him dress. Doctors apply ointments of dubious smell, and the bishop repeats that suffering is the path to forgiveness, convenient but comforting. Breathing is shorter, steps seem higher. The cold of the stone rises up the legs, as if the castle also wanted to remind him where he came from. No king is immortal, though many have tried to decree otherwise. The bronze mirror, crooked and darkened, reflects a face the king almost doesn't recognize. Dark circles are the new coat of arms, wrinkles the decrees time wrote without asking permission. There is an irony in all this, ruling hundreds of lives, but losing one's own little by little in silence, like a candle blowing out from the inside. In the corner, the bishop enters discreetly, speaks of prayer, of acceptance, of the soul needing rest before the body. The king listens, but what he understands is something else. The end is coming, and no one ever writes a decree against it. Outside, the bells toll slow, measured, reminding that time is the only servant who doesn't obey. The king tries to stand. His body doesn't follow. The mantle slips off his shoulder, and the crown forgotten on the table seems too distant to be worth the effort. Power, in the end, always ends up weighing more than fits in a single body. A servant approaches with a lamp. The flame trembles, the reflection dances on the walls, illuminating portraits of ancestors. All serious, all young, all dead. The kind of inheritance no one asks for, but everyone leaves. And as if the tired body weren't enough, comes the slow, heavy mind, repeating names and faces that no longer matter. Counselors, nobles, wars, everything mixes into a single thought. Was all that really necessary? Spoiler, usually it wasn't. The bishop keeps speaking, and the words now seem to echo from afar. He speaks of faith, of legacy, of deserved rest. The king nods slowly without disagreeing. After all, it is too late to start discussing theology. The lamplight weakens. The fireplace fire goes out for good. The hall gets cold, and the sound of the night invades through the windows. Outside, the wind seems to repeat the same lament echoing inside. Everything passes, even those who commanded to stay. The throne remains there firm, the same throne that always waited patiently for the next tired body. Power doesn't die. It just changes owners when the previous one can't take it anymore. The king looks once more at the crown. The gold still shines, but not for him. It is an impersonal, indifferent shine, the kind that reminds you metal feels nothing. He takes a deep breath. The pain in his back increases. The weight of the clothes tightens. The cold seems closer. Old age arrives without warning, but with the punctuality of a monastic clock. And yet, even with the body failing, there is a remnant of pride. The kind of vanity that doesn't surrender easily. After all, whether history calls him great or forgotten, that no longer depends on him, and in a way, it is even liberating. Silence returns, long, complete. The castle sleeps, and the king just watches. Every stone, every shadow, every memory, everything there seems to have more energy than him. Power was his for a lifetime. Now time takes the shift, and for the first time, the throne looks more alive than the man. The hall dawns slowly, as if the sun itself were afraid to enter. Light crosses the high windows and finds the king still there, motionless, surrounded by silence. The body, now quiet, seems smaller. The mantle covers the chest. The crown rests on the table, and the air carries that old smell of candle and time. Nothing changes suddenly. Candles keep burning, wind still blows through cracks, and the castle maintains its rhythm. A king's death is just another detail in the stone's routine. The servants discover the body with the same care they tidy the hall. The bishop is called, says the usual prayer, brief, respectful. His face is serene, his gaze tired. He has blessed too many kings to feign surprise. The throne, a few steps away, remains the same, untouched and motionless, waiting for the next one. Power has a patience life never had. The body is taken away, the name will be embroidered on tapestry, and the coat of arms adjusted with a new golden detail. The ceremony will come, the bell will toll, and the people will repeat the right words in the right tone, everything as the manual of the end mandates. And still, there is a calm irony in all this. The castle, the throne, the kingdom. Nothing really misses him. Only the servants notice the different silence. Power doesn't. Power is practical. In the place where the king breathed, now there is an echo. In the place of the man, only the title. And the title, as always, survives better. Outside, the wind moves the flags. The coat of arms gleams in the weak morning sun. The throne remains firm. Only the body changes. Only the name on the tapestry ages. And the castle, as if nothing had happened, returns to what it always was. Big, cold, and full of stories that repeat with different crowns. And in the end, everything goes back to the beginning. An empty throne, a new name, the same promises. Time, as always, repeats the script. It only changes the lead actor. The king dies, the kingdom continues, bells toll, and the castle, with its insolent calm, remains standing. The walls still hold the echo of oaths no one kept. And power, that stubborn old thing, pretends not to notice it has already tired everyone out. It is funny, or almost, how man spends his life believing he commands everything, and in the end discovers he barely commanded himself. Governing, after all, was always a pretty word for trying to control the inevitable. But there is a peace in that. Knowing the throne doesn't care is liberating. It doesn't judge, doesn't feel, doesn't wait. It just awaits the next one who will promise the same and end up the same. And perhaps that is what keeps everything standing. The necessary illusion, the faith that moves the servant, the duty that binds the noble, and the ego that convinces the king he isn't just one more among many. The castle returns to silence, the wind returns to enter through the windows, and patient history prepares to start again. The castle remains quiet, as if breathing slowly. The wind returns, crosses windows and runs along walls, bringing the same cold as the beginning. Torches tremble, the echo of footsteps that no longer exist spreads through the corridors, and stubborn life begins to reorganize itself. Outside, the bell tolls a single time. It is the usual announcement. The king is gone, the throne is not, and as the order of eras commands, the next name is already whispered before the old body cools. The choice is never random. In the early Middle Ages, a king was not born only of blood, but also of blessing. Lineage brought the right, the church the permission. Without both, the throne was just a chair. The nobles gather, the bishop is summoned. The new successor, too young to understand the weight and too old to escape it, is led to the altar. The ceremony is slow, full of gestures that seem eternal. First, the holy oil that runs down the forehead, symbol of divine anointing. Then the ring, the scepter, the sword. each object with a meaning no one dares to question. The bishop speaks of duty, faith, and sacrifice. The crowd nods, and the new motionless king learns the first lesson of power. When everyone kneels, he is the one who starts feeling the weight in his legs. The choir sings low, and the sound mixes with the wind entering through the open doors of the cathedral. The crown's gold reflects the candlelight, as if shining by its own will. But it is just gold. It always was. The bishop places the crown on the new king's head, and silence spreads. For an instant, everyone believes in the miracle of a fresh start. And the castle, old, familiar with all promises, merely watches. The cold and motionless throne receives another body, another voice, the same destiny. The wheel turns, the name changes, the weight does not. While the anointing oil still shines under the candlelight, the previous body already rests under the stone. And the indifferent wind blows on both sides, that of the living and that of those who rest. The bell tolls one more time, slow, distant. The castle breathes, the night returns to the starting point, and power, as always, remains awake. Good night, tired listener, and until next time, sleep with a tired story.